When you first started in event production, you probably were overwhelmed by the amount of acronyms and inside baseball in the craft. There were so many shorthands and things that you didn't know, especially if you're just throwing on a show and expected to load in and work with people who are already knowing what they're doing. And that's pretty intimidating. So today I want to share 10 key terms that you need to know for sound system design and tuning specifically. You may be familiar with audio. You can spell XLR, right? But there are specific terminology birthed out of this craft that we have for systems engineering. And I want to share those with you today. If you're into leveling up your sound system design and tuning game, I think you're also going to love my audio math survival spreadsheet. I've got that right here. It's got over 250 rows of calculations. I think it'd be super helpful for you. It helps you understand how frequency affects period and wavelength, how to calculate phase delay. You can convert voltage to linear values or decibel values. You can see what comb filters are happening, like if I have a certain amount of time offset. Anyway, this is something that I built as I learned the craft. I think it'd be helpful for you as you're diving more into this subject. All right, let's jump right into 10 sound system design and tuning terms that you need to know. First up, let's take a look at range ratio. Here we have a single speaker that's pointed at the back row, and we have measured it 51 feet for it to throw to the back versus only 12 feet to throw to the front row. So it's the very front of our audience and the very rear. So if we divide those two numbers, we have a number number 4.3. And I'm putting a colon to 1. So basically we've simplified this fraction down to a decimal on the left-hand side and made the denominator a 1. What this tells me is that the back row is 4.3 times farther than the front row. So that's all you have to do is take how far it's thrown to the back, divide it by how far it's thrown to the front, and away you go. You can change this ratio by raising or lowering the speaker. Imagine I've had the speaker really low, maybe right here over that B, and that's not a far throw at all to the front, and then it's throwing all the way to the back. So that's a very extreme range ratio. But if I raised it up here, that will lower it because now it's throwing farther to the front, and since it's not having to go quite as much to the back, so that would maybe bring it down below 4. So that's how you can alter it, is usually with trim height if you have a fixed audience. So a low range ratio is 2-to-1 up to 4-to-1. You can usually overcome that with a single speaker. Anywhere above that, you're probably going to need delay speakers or relay speakers, or have to use a line array, which you're able to bend its coverage to overcome that type of severe range ratio. So that is a really good metric for you to have at the beginning of your designs of saying, hey, I'm going to ballpark my speaker hangs right about here. What's my range ratio front to back? Can this speaker system that I'm given overcome that? Because if we have a really high range ratio, it's going to be too loud in the front and too soft in the back. And it's our goal as systems engineers to be able to reduce that within a plus or minus 3 dB span across the entire spectrum, which we'll talk about with coverage. So that's number 2, coverage. Here's a look at a design I did for a show in an arena. And right now it's just the 2 main hangs, 2 12-box line arrays, and then a single speaker here in the center. Everything that's green shows me that this is within a plus or minus 3 dB span at 4K with a 3-octave weighting. So this is prioritizing high frequencies. When we say, hey, is that audience section covered? They're usually talking about, is it intelligible? Therefore, the high frequencies. We cannot always get our low mids and lows to be even everywhere because we usually don't have the line length and line arrays, which that's beyond the scope of this video. But we do need to make sure that the high frequencies are getting everywhere in an even amount. You can see here that this area right here, the orange and yellow, means it's above that mark, and then the blue here on the sides is below that. So I did not get 100% of the audience within the plus or minus 3 dB span, but this is before the tuning, so maybe I could bring down some of the high frequencies in the front on those bottom boxes, or I can add some outfill or delay speakers here on the side to help make sure it is coverage. So coverage, make sure there is more or less a speaker pointed at every member of the audience, and they are within a desirable target. To me, that's plus or minus 3 dB throughout the entire audience, so everyone's having a great show. Now moving on to number 3, tonal uniformity. we have covered everyone, and it's great for everyone to have high frequencies, but what can we do better than that? Can we make the entire show even throughout the entire frequency spectrum? And that's tonal uniformity. So this is that same show. I have my main hang right here, my main's right, and this is the floor. So I need to cover everyone on the floor. I have its twin hang left over here in that center fill speaker. But I want to make sure that everyone has equal tonality throughout. So one way I'm going to do that is place a microphone in 4 areas, A, B, C, and D. So this is along the center of the boxes throughout to my audience. And it's, these bottom few boxes are going here, and then here, here, and here. And I know that on axis, or on the center of the speaker's throat, it's going to be its most linear and have the most amount of high frequency content. So that's where you want to measure. But I'm going to get at each of these points front to back and make it as even as possible. So here is that same prediction, looking at a side view from that. And this is 4K with a 3-octave weighting. And earlier we saw that, yes, here was getting more high frequency energy because it is closer. I'm attempting to overcome that by spreading out the boxes, but can't always do that. But I need to use some EQ on the field. Whereas right here is not getting as much of that high frequency all the way to the back. So I need to do some work with the high frequencies in the field to make that happen. But here are the traces I got, and this is, in my book, this was after the EQ and the tuning, I was able to get everything to bend to my target trace. So this is a target trace I got from Michael Lawrence. Thanks, dude. But these are the 4 colors you saw, A, B, C, D, corresponding with the 4 traces I have. So this is within, for the most part, a plus or minus 3 dB span all across the target, which is the white trace. And that is success in my book. I don't have even highs and the low end is all over the place. I don't have lows right, and then the highs are over the place. I want everything to match and follow a very similar slope, so everyone has a similar tonal experience. They're not hearing the lows versus the highs out of whack. 4th is sound pressure level, otherwise known as SPL. All right, so SPL measures the sound pressure level at a given point. So I could put out a microphone or a super cheap Radio Shack meter, and it's going to give me a number. That number uses the decibel scale. It's not an absolute value, but it is tied to one. So what it's converting for us was usually measured in microbars or pascals. So the threshold of human hearing is at 20 micropascals, or 20 millionths of a pascal. And a pascal measures the pressure, the sound pressure at a given spot, because sound pressure it compresses and it has a rarefaction that goes back to rest. So when the atmosphere is completely at rest, that means there's no sound. But when there's 20 micropascals of movement, the human ear can sense it and convert that to sound. But then our hearing goes all the way up to 20 pascals, which is, standing next to a jet engine and we're just overloaded. That's way, way, way too loud. So that would be maybe 130 dB SPL, right? So that is a million times increase to get to that. 20 micropascals is 20 millionths up to 20 pascals. So that is a huge, huge scale. And that's a huge amount of granularity all in between that. So we use the decibel scale instead. So that helps us know if we're running our show too hot or too quiet. So we can have a microphone at front of house and measure that. But know that SPL doesn't always equate to loudness. We usually think of that, it helps determine the loudness, but loudness is a little bit more complicated than just a single pressure level, because what about the frequency balance? What about the loudness relative to the noise floor around us? There's other factors that weigh in here. It also uses a weighting scale for us so that we can filter out some frequencies in the measurement so it might approximate human hearing a little bit better, and that's A weighting. And then C weighting, it's going to have the full frequency spectrum and give us usually a higher number because it's going to include the subs, which are usually run up above the mains. So yeah, SPL, the range of a show might be anywhere between like 85 and maybe 105. So that's a 20 dB range, depending on your source content. If it's just a single speaker on stage talking, it might be 85. If you're at an EDM festival, it might be 105 A weighted. So that's a pretty big range. That would be a 10x increase, right? In maybe 5x, sorry, if we're converting human perception. But anyway, SPL helps us measure the sound pressure level at a given point, and then gives us a number of how far above are we of the human threshold of hearing, and that might be anywhere in the range of maybe 80 dB up to 105 for a concert level. And of course, sounds found in nature somewhere else are going to be all over the map. All right, now point source. I think we're on number 5. So a point source, colloquially used, is usually referring to like a single speaker, just a woofer and a horn or compression driver or whatever. Like, hey, give me a point source. It's in comparison to a line array. So a point source, we usually think of a single speaker, but technically speaking, we have a single point in which sound is radiating outwards in a sphere. And if we're able to slice off some of that sphere, we see the point is moving here and through all these, and it's expanding, which gives us the inverse square law, which means we lose half of our sound level for every doubling of distance. And that's the math behind that, is the point source, because that sphere in this formula and how it works out is a shorthand for that, is we lose half our level when we have a doubling of distance. So point source. Coupling. Here we go. This one was confusing to me for a long time, but coupling is when we're able to get two different sources lined up and they add together in level. So right here, I have a phase graph of a mains and a sub, and their phase traces are lined up for the most part. And so they're going to combine together and couple. The opposite of coupling is canceling. So we can see here on the phase wheel by Merlin Van Veen, this is a beautiful graphic, that if we have two sources that are absolutely aligned, there's 0 degrees phase offset, we're going to get plus 6 dB. But if we move outwards to getting only 270, or maybe call that 90 degrees off, we're only going to get 3 dB. And if we are 120 degrees off, we're just going to get them come together, but there's no change. And then if we get beyond that, we get phase cancellation. So this is not always desirable for we want this to happen in our audience, but it can be a useful tool for us. Because this is a cardioid subarray. This is a gradient inline approach. I've got a tutorial on this of how to build it from scratch on my channel. So just search for that, cardioid subgradient inline. And so we have coupling in the front. So this is our weather map again. The colors that are moving away from blue or towards red which means we have a louder level or stronger SPL. And if it's blue, it's canceling in the back. So subs naturally are omnidirectional. The low frequency is going to move out in all directions equally. We can steer this energy out towards our audience and away from the stage. So that gives us less feedback, less reflections off the back wall, resulting in tighter low end. So coupling is when two sound waves are interacting together and summing together constructively. And its opposite is cancellation, where they meet with a certain amount of phase offset up to 180 degrees and they cancel out. DSP, or digital signal processor. So a simple DSP is already built into a speaker. This can handle things like crossover, it can add delay, it can add EQ, it can apply different FIR filters to these presets. So it's basically a computer that can alter sound and do useful stuff for us. So that list is here. It can choose inputs, contour, whatever. Make the speaker sound different to fit the use case we want. An external DSP is something like this, a Meyer Galaxy. So this can take in a certain amount of inputs. It's got 8 ins and then 16 outs. So it could take in lots of different sources, process them accordingly in this software. It can sum them together. It can create groups, it can create zones, it can EQ them, it can create crossovers, it can do low mid beam control, some fancy stuff. But a DSP is a computer that can take in audio, do things with it that make it useful, and then fan it out accordingly to whatever speakers or zones that we need it to. A dual channel analyzer. So I've got here Smart, there's also Open Sound Meter, there's Rita, there's Sat Live, there's lots of them out there, but a dual channel analyzer is different from a single channel analyzer, and that is able to do a transfer function. A transfer function compares two things. So anytime we're using something like Smart and want to get a measurement, we're going to have two things that are being compared. So we have our measurement signal and our reference signal. So our measurement signal is the microphone we have in front of our speaker or out in the room, or it could really be anything, but that's the most common thing we do is a very flat, neutral reference microphone out in the room collecting sound for us, and it's going to compare it back to a reference. And the reference is that same pink noise that we're usually running through our system that our microphone is hearing, but it's looping out and right back into our interface, and it's comparing those two. So if the pink noise is our gold standard, it is untouched, it is perfect, and it's going to say, hey, the thing that is different is what's going on in the room, the speaker, the acoustics, the decay time of the reverb in the room, the EQs that we have in line. All those are going to change what's going on. So here in this photo, I have let's look at this green trace. These are two traces I captured for Best Sound System before I tuned it. And we have here that this is a boost right here in the frequency response. We see it slowly falling over time. This is a speaker in space. If I just compared my measurement and reference, they're the same, I would just have a perfectly flat line, both in my magnitude and my phase response. I would have a single little spike here on my impulse response. But because we are using a measurement microphone in the real world in space, this is what we see. It is showing me what's different about the measured signal versus the reference. A dual channel analyzer also refers to like the entire package of the software. This one can measure SPL, it can do a few other things, but the main thing that's going to make it a dual channel that's specific is that it can do a transfer function. It is not an RTA or real-time analyzer that does a single channel measurement. Let's talk about shading. So shading, if we go back to our earlier example, is I had too much 4K hitting these first third of my audience, and then it was even here in the back. So what I can do with shading is if I have each of these boxes have their own EQ on them, and so I can use EQ to bring down just the high frequencies on those boxes so I can make it even front to back, and I can even bring up the high frequencies on these top box to start to tilt it to where everyone is getting the same high frequency response. I also want to make it sure it folds up naturally into the lows and low mids as well. But shading is usually what I'm talking about, usually a high shelf, maybe 1 or 2K and up, gently lifting up or decreasing the high frequencies so I can make it more even front to back. You can also do shading on the box entirely, but it's a trade-off because it's going to alter the headroom of the array, how the entire low, mid, and mid beaming of the array works. So use that with caution, but it's doing high frequencies alone and using a high shelf to bring them up gently or down is a great way to help make it more even front to back. Let's talk about pink shift. This is our last one here. So this is a concert and we're here at the middle of the room. So there's the front row and the back. So the front is going to be very close to our array here, our flown one or front fill, right? When you're very close to a speaker, it feels very immediate. You're going to have more top end, especially if it's not tuned yet or folded in with the rest of the system. And it's going to feel very immediate also because you're getting a lot of that speaker versus the rest of the room. So you're going to have a lot of top end. And it's going to feel close because you are close. The further you move back in the room, the more low end and low mid reflections you're going to have bouncing around, and you're going to be farther away from something. So the top end is going to drop off. So given that we get what's called pink shift. So we have pink, if we run that as perfectly flat, it's going to start to tilt down on the top end and up in the low end, the farther you move back into space. Some of that is desirable, and it's not that you have to get rid of it entirely, but just know that's something that's going to happen as a natural phenomenon of being in a room of the acoustics bouncing around low mids and lows, and you moving away, you're going to lose top end. And that phenomenon, like, hey, do you want more pink shift in the array? Because this is also a way you can tune a system. You can give it pink shift by bringing up the low end and decreasing the bottom. Because I think back right here on this, there's quite a bit of pink shift in this array. We have it flat, maybe has like a couple of D drop off as we move up. And this is about 500 hertz and it starts to move up and low end. So pink shift also refers to the contour of a sound system. If we have a more of a low end up tilt and then the high end dropping off some. Rarely do I see a PA where the high end is higher than the low frequencies. It is usually the low frequencies have an up tilt and the high end steadily falls down. Again, this is up to you. It's whatever you think ends up sounding right for your particular show and the acoustics of that room, but pink shift will be a part of the equation. All right, that were 10 terms that you should know as a sound system designer and in your tuning journeys. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure and grab the Audio Math Survival spreadsheet at the link below, and I will catch you next time.